and hopefully give you the core insights. Today we're getting into something that, well, it touches pretty much every part of your life, even if you haven't heard the name: psychological relativity. And to really get a feel for it, let's start with a classic experiment. You might have even done this in school. Imagine 3 bowls of water, okay? One's hot, one's cold, and the middle one is just tepid, room temperature. Now, put one hand in the hot water, the other in the cold. Keep them there for maybe a minute. Feel that. Okay, now, quick, pull both hands out and stick them right into that same bowl of tepid water. What happens? What do you feel? Well, if you're like most people, the hand from the hot water, it feels that tepid water is surprisingly cold. And the hand from the cold water, that same tepid water feels hot. It's a bit weird, right? Same water, but your hands are telling your brain completely opposite things.
Yeah, it seems like a paradox, but it's actually the perfect way into psychological relativity. It's not like your senses are broken or anything. It's showing a really fundamental principle of how we perceive things. The basic idea. It's simple, but deep. Quote, an observation is a relationship between the observer and the event observed. What that means is our experience isn't about absolute measures. It's always about comparison.
Right. And when you say relativity, I think most people immediately jump to, Einstein, space-time, all that.
Sure, that's a common association.
But this psychological relativity, while it uses the same word, is talking about something equally fundamental, but inside our own heads, yeah. It's about how your mind builds reality.
Exactly. It's about an observer-dependent reality in your own experience. Not light speed, but how you perceive the world. And it's interesting, this connects to really old philosophical questions. Is the universe itself observer-dependent? You even see echoes of it in some interpretations of quantum physics, like the Copenhagen interpretation. The idea that observing something actually changes it. It sort of touches on that whole materialism versus idealism debate, too. Is reality just matter, or is mind somehow fundamental? Our very personal relative perceptions kind of challenge any simple answer.
Okay, so why should you, our listener, care about this?
Yeah.
What's the mission for this deep dive? Well, we want to really unpack this idea, look at it from different angles. We'll start with the basics, like how perception even works. Then we'll dig into the biology behind it, the adaptation stuff. Then circle back to that hot and cold water thing to make it super clear. And finally, explore how it affects the big things: happiness, self-worth, money, even justice.
Right. And the main takeaway, the central thesis here, it's that one single really powerful principle is running underneath all of this. It's all about setting up and then constantly comparing things to a reference point. And this isn't just some abstract thought process. It's baked right into how our nervous system works from the ground up.
Okay, let's get into that. So perception.
Yeah.
It's not just like opening our eyes and seeing exactly what's out there, is it? Our subjective reality, the world in here, it's something we actually build.
That's exactly right. Perception is active, it's interpretive, it's a construct. Think about it. Our reaction isn't just to the raw input, but to the meaning we pull from it. And that meaning, it's not in the thing itself. It's assigned by us, the observer. Take smell of citrus. Physically, it's just chemicals, right? But for us, usually pleasant. For a cat or dog, often really unpleasant. The stimulus is the same, but the observer's system gives it a totally different meaning.
So the mind's not just a recording device. It's more like an artist interpreting a scene.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's constantly selecting, combining what comes in through the senses, that's the bottom-up data, with what's already in your head: memories, beliefs, expectations. That's the top-down influence. So photons hit your eye from a brown, four-legged thing making noises. That's bottom-up, but your mind goes, barking, furry shape, that's a dog, based on stored knowledge, top-down. And since everyone's memories and experiences are unique, their interpretation will be slightly different, too. It's a constant loop.
Which brings us back to those deep philosophical waters. If we're all constructing our own view, is there one real reality out there? Or are there billions of slightly different ones?
Yeah. That's the crux of it, isn't it? Some theories, even borrowing from physics, suggest maybe objective reality isn't something we just find, but something we participate in creating by observing it. Our only way in is through our own unique conscious filters, which really drives home how relative our world is.
Okay, and you mentioned something called cognitive penetrability.
Yeah.
That sounds like the line between just seeing and thinking gets blurry.
It really does. It means your thoughts, your beliefs, what you want to see can actually change what you perceive. The example often used is seeing a physically white banana, but because you really believe bananas are yellow, you might perceive a yellowish tint. Your belief is literally coloring your perception.
Wow. So it's not pure data coming in. It's already filtered by our thoughts.
Pretty much. Before it even hits full awareness, it's shaped by your cognitive framework. Philosophers argue about whether experience is like a picture of the world or a direct connection with it. Psychological relativity, with its focus on our internal state, kind of complicates both views.
And some thinkers, like Susanna Schellenberg, suggest it's both, a mix of the outside world and our internal model.
Exactly, an irreducible blend. And that feels like the core of psychological relativity.
Okay, so let's talk about context, because this seems huge. We think we see an object on its own, but the surroundings matter, right? Like that Ebbinghaus illusion.
Absolutely. Context effects are everywhere, and they're incredibly powerful. The Ebbinghaus illusion, those Titchener circles, is perfect. Two identical central circles, but one looks smaller just because it's surrounded by big circles, and the other looks bigger because it's surrounded by small ones. Your brain uses the surroundings to judge the center.
And context isn't just visual, right?
Yeah.
It's layered.
Totally. There's the immediate environmental context, lighting, distance. Think of a white mug, bright white in sun, dull gray in shadow. The mug didn't change, but the light did, and so did your perception.
And then cultural context. Our background shapes what we even pay attention to.
Definitely. Research shows, for instance, that people from more collectivist cultures might focus more on the whole scene, the group dynamics, while those from individualistic cultures focus more on the central figure or object. It can even change how you read emotions and faces. A smile might mean something slightly different depending on cultural norms.
And our internal state, too. Mood, tiredness.
Yep. Internal state context. Mood, cognitive load, even how hungry you are. State-dependent memory is a classic example. Easier to remember happy things when you're happy, sad things when you're sad. Your mood provides the context for recall.
So the big point for you, the listener, here is, well, there's no perfectly objective human view.
Pretty much. Our systems are built to be biased by our history, our culture, our mood, the environment.
So when we disagree with someone socially, politically, whatever, maybe it's not that they're wrong and we're right.
It's very possible you're both operating from different but internally consistent reference frames, filtering the same facts through different contexts, leading to genuinely different subjective realities.
Recognizing that,
Yeah.
that seems really important.
Yeah. And if perception is always relative to context, there must be a biological way the system adjusts. And that's adaptation. This isn't like your muscles getting tired. It's a really sophisticated multi-level process. It's the engine constantly recalibrating us.
And the main reason for it is just too much information. We'd be swamped otherwise.
Exactly. Information overload. Think about it. The feeling of your clothes, the chair, background noise. If you noticed all that constantly, you couldn't function.
Right. You'd just be overwhelmed.
So, sensory adaptation filters out the constant, predictable stuff. It turns down the volume on the unchanging background hum. This frees up your mental bandwidth to notice what is changing, what's new, what might be important, a potential threat, or maybe food. It's about efficient coding, really. Our brains have limits. Adaptation helps subtract the average, the predictable, so we can focus on the deviations, the useful bits of information.
Okay, so how does the body actually do that? Is it happening in our skin?
Yeah.
In our brain?
It's happening at multiple levels, all the way from the sensory receptors themselves, like in your skin or eyes, right up through the pathways in the spinal cord and into the brain. And the mechanisms are varied, too. The connections between neurons, synapses, can literally get weaker or stronger based on activity that's synaptic plasticity. Then you have inhibitory neurons that actively dampen signals. Think of them like noise-canceling headphones for your brain. And even chemicals, neuromodulators, that can adjust the gain on sensory pathways, making you more or less sensitive depending on, say, if you're focusing hard or if something startles you.
And it can even change our genes over time.
Yeah, over longer timescales, like hours or days, there can be changes in gene expression that alter neuron sensitivity. It's an active, ongoing maintenance process, not just passive fatigue.
Okay, so it's not just fatigue. There was also this idea of sharpening, right? How do those fit together?
Good question. For a while, they seemed like competing ideas. Fatigue just means neurons firing less. Sharpening means they become more selective, better tuned to specific stimuli. But recent work, looking at things like visual after effects, suggests it might be a two-stage process. You get an initial broad reduction in sensitivity, maybe that's the fatigue part, but then perhaps through feedback signals, you get increased selectivity, the sharpening. So first blunt the response, then refine it.
And we should probably clarify adaptation versus habituation. People use those interchangeably sometimes.
Right, they're related but different. Sensory adaptation is more physiological, automatic, unconscious, like your pupils adjusting or not feeling your watch anymore. It's happening at the cellular level.
Okay. And habituation.
Habituation is more of a psychological learning process. It's a decrease in your response to something that's repeated. You're often aware of it, like moving near a train track. At first, the noise bothers you. After a while, you say, I've gotten used to it. You've habituated. The classic example is tuning out a ticking clock.
So adaptation is kind of the mechanism behind habituation sometimes.
Often, yes. Sensory adaptation is the neural change that leads to the psychological experience of habituation. And because adaptation happens across different timescales super fast, or over days, it creates this chronological relativity. Your perception right now is shaped by recent adaptation. But your stable biases, like how your own home smells neutral, are shaped by long-term adaptation. This explains things like getting used to a new climate, or even the long process of trauma recovery, which involves slowly resetting what feels normal or safe.
Okay, this is great. Let's bring all this back to that hands in water experiment. How does adaptation explain that weird hot-cold feeling from the same tepid water?
Right, this is where it all comes together. It starts with understanding our molecular thermometers.
The TRP channels.
Exactly, transient receptor potential channels, proteins in our sensory nerve endings in the skin that detect temperature changes.
And there are different ones for different temperatures. Hot, cold, really hot.
Yep, a whole family of them. Some respond to cold, some to cool, some to warmth, some to painful heat. TRPM8 for cool, TRPV1 for heat and spicy capsaicin, for instance.
Oh.
And that's the cool part. Pun intended, substances like menthol activate the cool channel, TRPM8. And capsaicin from chili peppers activates a hot channel, TRPV1. That's why they feel cold or hot. The brain just gets the signal from that channel. It doesn't know if it was actual temperature or a chemical.
So spicy and hot use the same pathway, essentially.
At the receptor level, yes. And these channels aren't fixed. Inflammation, like a sunburn, can make the heat channels more sensitive, so normal warmth feels painful. Your internal state changes perception.
Okay, so the signal starts there, then it goes where?
Up nerve fibers, different speeds for hot and cold, actually through the spinal cord up to the thalamus in the brain, which is like a central sorting office. Then it goes to the insular cortex for the conscious feeling of temperature, and the hypothalamus to trigger bodily responses like shivering or sweating.
All right, moment of truth. The hands in the water. How does adaptation solve the paradox?
Okay, step one, establishing new baselines. When your hands are sitting in the hot and cold water, the TRP channels initially fire like crazy. Then they adapt. Their firing rate slows down. They essentially recalibrate. The hot water starts to feel less hot, the cold water less cold. Each hand establishes its current temperature as the new neutral baseline.
Got it. They get used to it, basically.
Exactly. Then step two, interpreting the change. When both hands go into the same tepid water, the brain isn't reading the absolute temperature, it's reading the change in firing rate relative to that newly adapted baseline for each hand.
Ah, okay. So for the hot hand.
For the hand that was in hot water, the tepid water is significantly cooler than its adapted baseline, so the warmth receptors suddenly fire much less. The brain interprets that decrease as cold.
And for the cold hand.
For the hand that was in cold water, the tepid water is significantly warmer than its adapted baseline, so the warmth receptors suddenly fire much more. The brain interprets that increase as hot.
Wow. So it really is all relative. The feeling isn't about the water's temperature itself, but the change from what the hand just experienced.
Precisely. It perfectly demonstrates that perception is a relative judgment against an adapted baseline.
That is. Yeah, that changes how you think about almost everything sensory. Okay, so let's broaden out now. Because this relativity thing, this adaptation and comparison, it doesn't stop at hot and cold, does it? It runs right through our emotions, our social lives.
Absolutely. It extends deep into higher order cognition, happiness, self-worth, value judgments, even ideas about fairness. They all seem to operate on similar relative principles.
Let's start with happiness, the hedonic treadmill.
Yeah.
That sounds slightly depressing.
Well, it can seem that way. It's the idea that we tend to return to a relatively stable level of happiness, our set point, despite big life events. You get that promotion, buy that dream car, there's a boost, sure, but it often fades. The novelty wears off.
And the same for bad things. We bounce back.
Largely, yes. We adapt. Part of it is sensory, like getting used to a smell. But a lot is cognitive. We shift our attention. We reframe things. There's a model called happy any hedonic adaptation to positive and negative experiences. It says the emotion itself lessens, but also our expectations change. The new car becomes the new normal. That promotion becomes the baseline.
And evolutionarily, this makes sense. stops us getting stuck.
Exactly. It prevents us from being perpetually miserable after setbacks. And on the flip side, it prevents complacency. If the joy from achievements lasted forever, we might stop striving, so it keeps us motivated.
Okay, so happiness is relative. What about self-worth? How does comparison play in there?
Hugely. Social comparison theory is all about this. We figure out our own value, how good we are, how worthy, by comparing ourselves to others. They're our reference group.
And we compare upwards and downwards?
Right. Upward comparison is looking at people better off. Can be motivating, or it can make you feel inadequate, envious. And social media just pours gasoline on this fire, right? Everyone's posting their highlight reel. It creates these totally unrealistic reference points.
Yeah, comparing your everyday life to someone's curated vacation pics. Ouch.
And then downward comparison is looking at people worse off. That can boost your ego, make you feel grateful. And this isn't new. It's likely got deep evolutionary roots in checking your status in the group for resources, mates, all that. It's baked in.
Okay, so our internal state, our social standing, what about economics? How does relativity show up when we're making decisions about, say, money?
This is where prospect theory comes in, from Kahneman and Tversky. It's huge in behavioral economics. The core idea is we don't think in absolute dollar amounts. We think in gains and losses relative to where we are right now, our reference point, our status quo.
And this leads to loss aversion. We hate losing more than we like winning.
Much more. Losing $100 feels way worse than gaining $100 feels good. Psychologically, the impact is bigger because it's a drop from that reference point.
And framing effects. How you phrase the choice changes everything.
Absolutely. Same outcome, different decision. The classic is the disease problem. Frame it as saving 200 lives and people play it safe. Frame it as 400 people will die, and suddenly people are willing to gamble.
Because saving lives is a gain frame, and people dying is a loss frame.
Exactly. It shifts the reference point, flips the preference.
Yeah.
So hedonic adaptation, social comparison, prospect theory, they're all showing the same underlying mechanism. Our brain calculates differences from a reference point, not absolute value.
Wow. And this even extends to something as abstract as justice.
It seems so. Think about moral relativism. The idea that what's right or wrong depends on your cultural or historical standpoint. Or social contract theories, like Hobbes' rules are judged by how well they work for this society. And then there's John Rawls' Justice is Fairness. He asks, what rules would we pick if we didn't know our own position in society behind a veil of ignorance?
Forcing fairness because you might end up at the bottom.
Right. And his difference principle is key here. It says inequalities are okay only if they benefit the least well off. So justice isn't some absolute standard. It's judged relative to its impact on the most vulnerable. It's a relational concept.
Okay, so bringing this section together for you, the listener, it's kind of mind-bending. Our relative thinking leads to weird things like the Easterlin paradox. Countries get richer, people don't get happier because the goalposts keep moving.
Right, and social media makes us compare ourselves to the entire world's elite, potentially fueling dissatisfaction.
And it suggests there's no single perfect social system, just constant negotiation based on relative values and who benefits.
Yeah, the same adaptive machinery that helps us survive creates these complex, sometimes counterintuitive results in our social and emotional lives.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, from skin receptors to social justice. And the thread running through it all is psychological relativity. It really seems like a fundamental operating principle. The brain just doesn't do absolutes. It does baselines and deviations, reference points and comparisons.
And it's crucial to remember this isn't a bug, it's a feature. It's an incredibly efficient way for a limited system to handle a complex world. It filters the noise, highlights the changes, keeps us motivated, prevents us from getting emotionally stuck. It's a powerful evolutionary advantage.
So what can you listening now take away from this? What are the practical uses?
Well, in therapy, for instance, cognitive behavioral therapy is largely about helping people reframe things, shift their reference points. Exposure therapy for phobias, that's basically guided habituation, recalibrating the fear response by repeatedly showing the feared stimulus isn't actually harmful.
And in economics, understanding this helps explain consumer behavior, right? Why that new gadget thrill fades.
Exactly. And why framing matters so much in advertising or public policy. It allows for nudges, designing choices to help people make better long-term decisions, like saving for retirement or choosing healthier foods by playing on these relative judgments.
And for just personal growth, living a better life.
Yeah, understanding this gives you tools to fight the hedonic treadmill. Seek novelty, practice gratitude to appreciate your current baseline. Focus on engaging activities, gratifications, not just fleeting pleasures.
And with social comparison.
Be mindful of your reference group. Maybe curate your social media feed. Compare yourself more to your past self, not just others. Track your own progress.
So it's like in the 20th century, Einstein showed us the physical universe is relative.
And maybe the big insight for the 21st century from neuroscience and psychology is that our internal universe, our perception, emotions, sense of self, is just as fundamentally and necessarily relative.
So the question for you is,
Yeah.
what will you do with that understanding?